it'd probably be best to start our chain in the front view. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll press 2 on our number pad. Let's go ahead and grab the skeleton tool. Sweet, so from there we'll go ahead and zoom in. And we'll create a chain for the index finger. Once we've built this chain, we'll then go ahead and move down to the pinky. And then we'll worry about the thumb last, since it's going to have a slightly different angle than the other fingers. Now we will be creating metacarpal bones, and that will not only allow us to get some realism as we animate the fingers, but since we're having so many joints inside of the hand, it will help with the skinning. We won't have to spend so much time skinning to those joints. So here's what we'll do. We'll go ahead and get started. We'll click to create our metacarpal bone, and then we'll start to move down the finger. Let's be really careful where we're placing our joints, just to make sure that we do get some natural deformations. So go ahead and click forward and then bring this down. Again, we do that so that we can correct the orientation of the joint. So again, I'll go ahead and click in front of the joint and then use the left mouse button to bring it center down. Great. Let's go ahead and click again and then bring this down to the tip. Sweet. So there we have it. From there, let's go ahead and drop our tool with the space bar. And now we can go ahead and head over to our perspective view. Let's go ahead and hit the period key on the number pad. Let's have a look at where our chain is. I'd like to go ahead and take the root, and I'd like to go ahead and just bring this forward. Let's grab our move tool and translate it. Alright, sweet. So after we have this in place, we can then go ahead and duplicate this to the other fingers. Let's go ahead and grab our rotate tool, kind of rotate this around. And this is going to be a combination of moving this joint and rotating it until we have it successfully inside of the index finger. Now right now, what I'd like to do is go ahead and take the move tool and set that to local mode, so we're moving local to the orientation of this joint. It'll be a lot easier for us to fit it in place that way, as you can see. Sweet. And then I'll go ahead and take the rotate tool again, just kind of rotate that in, and there we have it. So that looks really nice. If anything, we might go ahead and take our end joint and move this down a bit more, so we can start to kind of translate it down. And as you can see, it's not really local, right? Well, remember, if you want to match the orientation of this joint to its parent, all you have to do is go to your channels viewport, go ahead and search for your rotation list. Here it is, and simply delete it. Sweet. So now when we grab that joint again, we are moving in its local space. Alright, fantastic. Remember, all end joints are oriented to the world, so if you need to, just go ahead and clear out all of that rotation, and you're good to go. Sweet. So this looks great. Let's say we go ahead and take our chain and duplicate it, Control D, and now we can go ahead and translate this over. Sweet. So once we've managed to do that, we'll then go ahead and rotate it. And I'd say we could also translate it down just a bit more. Alright, let's go ahead and do this. We'll move over to more of a side view and we'll translate this down just a bit, locally in the Y and X plane. Alright, fantastic. So this looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and double check to make sure this placement will work. Good stuff. And then we'll go ahead and duplicate this chain and continue this process. We'll go ahead and move this to the ring finger. Let's say we translate this up. Alright, we're again checking our joint placement. I'd say if anything, we can go ahead and grab our rotate tool and kind of rotate this over to our left a bit more. Fantastic. All right, so that leaves us with the pinky finger. Let's go ahead and duplicate, bring this across. You can see how much time we're saving by using this method of kind of just going in and using the chain that we started with. You can see for the pinky as well that we're going to have to do just a little bit of work as far as adjusting the entire length of our chain just to get this to work. But no worries. Again, we're still saving time here. Alright. So after having a look at things, what I'd like to do is go ahead and match up at least one of our joints to its section. So right now I'm focused on the lower section of the pinky, just making sure that that bone placement will work. And then we can build from there, right? We can go ahead and take the following joint. Let's go ahead and enter into center mode. And with the center selected, again moving locally, we'll go ahead and just translate this down. Sweet. And that's in the Y and X plane. We'll move to the next joint. Let's go ahead and get that selected. I'll go back to items mode, select the joint, back to centers. Let's go ahead and grab it center, and let's go ahead and bring this down. Sweet. That looks good. Alright, great. And now we have just one more joint to tweak. I'll go back to items mode so we can select it, and then back to centers. Let's go ahead and bring this in. We'll grab our move tool, and we'll start by moving in our X and Z plane. Sweet, so once we've done that, I'll then go ahead and adjust this in the X and Y plane. And there we have it. Super cool. Alright, so we managed to create most of our finger bones. Remember just to go through and check each. I might go to the indexes chain again. Go back to centers. You can see I'm adjusting the metacarpal bone just to kind of tuck that inside of the geometry a bit more. So just go ahead and transit it back just a bit locally in the y-axis. And I think we're good to go here. Alright, sweet. I'll go ahead and jump back to items mode, and we'll call this lesson done. So in the following lesson, let's go ahead and create a thumb chain. We'll also want to rename our joints and then connect them back to the wrist, and then afterwards we can go ahead and work on mirroring our entire arm chain across. And then once we've done we can go ahead and grab the root of our index finger. Let's go ahead and duplicate that and work from there. Again, just to save some time. So after we've duplicated the chain, there it is, we'll then go ahead and use the rotate tool to rotate this up locally. Sweet. And then I'd like to go ahead and translate this back locally in the y-axis. Sweet. Let's say we push it back a bit more in the X and Y plane, just to make sure it will pivot from the right point. And if you ever need help to figure out that pivot point, remember you can always rely on your own hand. So a lot of times I'll go ahead and kind of rotate my fingers and get an idea as to where each joint should be placed. Alright, sweet. So this looks good. If anything, we can now go ahead and grab our rotate tool again and kind of rotate this around. Nice. And now this is where it gets to be just a little bit tricky, because what we want to do is reposition the rest of the chain in a way where we follow the angle of the thumb. So look at the angle of your thumbnail, and by that you'll know exactly how to tweak the other joints. So we should be able to just go in and tweak the following joint in this chain, and that should take care of the rest of the hierarchy as far as the joint angle is concerned. So I'll kind of twist this around. Again, I'm looking at the thumbnail to figure out how this should be oriented, and that looks good. So once we've managed to do that, we can then go ahead and kind of fix this in other angles, maybe rotate this down a bit. Alright, great. And now we can grab the following joint. And then from here, what I'd like to do is go ahead and kind of move this up. No need to go to centers mode here. Just go ahead and translate this back a bit in the X and Y plane. Right, and then we can go ahead and rotate this up locally in the Z axis. Sweet, you can see we have this extra joint that we do not need. So no worries, we could always delete it. So go ahead and grab the end joint, just go ahead and trash that, and then we'll grab the following joint. Let's go ahead and pull this back so it's at the edge of the thumb. And there we have it. We've managed to create our chain in no time at all. Now remember, to clean up the orientation of this joint, you could always go to Channels, go ahead and find your Rotate list. Just go ahead and delete that so it matches the orientation of its parent. Alright, super cool. I might also go ahead and take its parent and kind of translate that down just a bit more so it's more centered inside of the finger. A lot of times you want to make sure it's just a little bit higher than the center so you get the right amount of deformation, so you get a really nice looking pinch when you start to curl the fingers in. Okay, so this looks good. From here, I like to go ahead and take the time to rename each joint. And you can see the naming convention here is just a little bit off. So this is not necessarily the wrist, right? Remember, if you ever want to go in and rename your joints, you could always go ahead and grab the skeleton tool, go to tool properties, and here is the naming convention that you can build from. So if you don't necessarily want an ID, like in this case I have bind L wrist, you could always go ahead and clear that out. And now, after hitting enter, whenever you start to create a chain, I'm just going in and drawing this just so you can see what the naming convention is going to be. You can see it's going to be really generic. Let me go ahead and find that chain for you. Just go ahead and drop the tool. So here's that chain that we just built. It's generic because we haven't specified a name yet. Alright, sweet. I'll just go ahead and delete that. But yes, let's go in and start renaming our joints. So starting with the index finger, that's going to be bind L, index A, and then we'll name these alphabetically. So I'll go ahead and copy that. Remember, you can go ahead and shift click to expand your hierarchy. And when you get to the next joint, let's go ahead and paste and change the A to a B. Remember, when you get to the very end of the chain, we'll use a prefix of BE. So that's BE, L index, and in this case it's going to be E as our suffix. Cool. So you get the idea. Let's rename the others. So the next is going to be mid, and then ring, and then pinky, and then we have the thumb. So I'll pause the video and do this on my end. Alrighty, so all the joints have now been renamed. So the next step is to just go ahead and take each of these roots and parent to the wrist. So go ahead and grab all 5. We'll shift select our wrist bone. Let's go ahead and press the P key, and there you have it. So now when we select the wrist and we start to rotate this bone object, there you have it. Everything else will follow. Wonderful stuff. See, the character's waving now. And you made that possible. Cool. Alright, great. Well, now that we're finished up here, the next step is to go ahead and mirror this chain across, and then we have to clean up the skeleton. We basically need to make sure that we zero out our transform values. So we start with a 0 value for each of our joints. This is super important, especially when we start to introduce more systems to have the rig work the way we want it to. Alright, so let's go ahead and stop the lesson here. In the following lesson, we'll mirror the clavicle bone and parent to the chest. Alright, sweet. So now when we start to rotate our chest bone, the arm will follow. Cool. Now we'll grab the same clavicle bone, and with that selected, we'll head over to our Commands tab. Now we can go ahead and use Mirror Hierarchy X to clone this chain and mirror it across. There you have it. So you can see how much time that saves. And now it's just a matter of going in and renaming these joints. So what I'll do on my end is pause the video and take care of that step. Please do the same thing on your end. And then when we come back, we'll go ahead and zero the transforms of all of our joints. Okay, so all joints have been renamed on the character's right half. Wonderful. Okay, so the next step is to just go ahead and zero out all of those messy values. So here's what we'll do. We'll go ahead and find our root bone, and with that selected, we can go ahead and right click and we can choose Select Item Hierarchy. So it's going to grab all joints, and now it's just a matter of going to 0, and we'll choose all. So that's all there is to it. Now we start from a 0 value. Sweet. So that's very clean then. Well, that's it for this lesson. And then work on the easier areas first, which would be the eyes, the eyebrows, the hair, simply because we won't be getting into facial rigging in this course. It'd be a huge course if we did. So knowing that, we'll just go ahead and skin all of those pieces to one bone object. That, of course, being the head bone. And then we'll have a look at a really neat option with the binding tool that allows us to get a very accurate weighting when we apply the bind. So let's go ahead and get to it. You'll notice that we cannot select our geometry. No worries. Let's go to our groups viewport. We'll go to Mesh, right click, and let's go ahead and switch our members selectable mode to either default or on. Now if I were to switch this back to default, you might notice that we cannot select our geometry. However, if we were to go back to items and select any one of those pieces, you'll notice that now we can go in and select the mesh. So no worries. Now we can go in and select all of the pieces that we would like to weight to our head bone. So I'm grabbing the eyes, the eyelashes, the eyebrows, and the hair. So with everything selected, we can now grab the head bone, the item we'd like to bind to, and then we can jump to our Deformers tab. You'll notice that we cannot access the binding tool, not just yet, not until we enter into setup mode. And now we can go ahead and apply the bind. You'll notice that when we do, an option window appears that allows us to choose optimal settings for our bind. Now in this case, we can work with the default, which is smooth distance, which basically looks at the distance between a joint and vertices that surround that joint to determine how weight should be distributed. So points that are closest to a given joint will receive more weighting, and as we start to get further and further apart, that weighting will start to diminish. Now, smooth visible is kind of going to do the same thing, only if we have a really complex piece of geometry and if we have vertices that are on the opposite side of, let's say, a given part of our mesh in a way where they are invisible to a joint. Those points will not be influenced by that joint. So again, any invisible points will not be influenced by a given joint with visible. So we can get some good results with this. And then we have heat, which is great for character animation, simply because the deformations we get with heat are very accurate, and if anything, there are only a few areas to tweak as far as weighting is concerned. So we're going to have a look at that when we're ready to skin the character's body. We have rigid as well, which is going to either create 100% influence or no influence at all. So any joints that are closest to, again, a given set of points, we're going to get 100% weighting, and there will be no blend. However, with this option, you'll have a faster performance here in Modo, because it doesn't have to consider something as complex as, let's say, a transition or a gradient between 100% weighting and 0. Alright, sweet. So knowing that, we can go ahead and work with this first option, smooth distance, for the objects that we would like to skin here. Do also keep in mind that we can adjust our fall off type. So we can go ahead and set this to either high if we would like to have a greater fall off, or low for less of a fall off. I tend to stick with medium. That gives us some really good results. Bind as segments. This is cool because, again, joints that are closest to a given set of vertices, well, those vertices are going to have an influence according to the radius of the joint object, whereas when this is off, it's going to consider the segments in between two joints, or the bone object itself. So sometimes you get something a little bit more accurate when this is on. And then if you were working on, let's say, a game character and you needed to have a certain limit with the amount of joints that can influence a given point, and sometimes that limit is 4, but you'll notice that when we go ahead and turn that on, that's the number that we start with. So again, for game characters, chances are you're going to want to use this option here. Sometimes you might even want to drop this value to about 2 or 3, depending on the type of game you're working on. Like an MMO would probably use about, let's say, 2 or 3 at the most. But nowadays, for next-gen gaming, I think 4 works out very well. You might move this value a little bit higher, but I find that 4 is a good value to work with. So I don't think there's any need to change that. But since we're not working on a game character necessarily, we can go ahead and uncheck this option. And we're good to go. Let's go ahead and choose OK. And you can see that all of those pieces have now been weighted. So if I were to go ahead and exit setup mode, watch this. When we grab the head bone and we start to add some rotation, let's grab the E key and we'll start to left click and drag. You'll see that those objects will now follow. How cool is that? Now, watch this. When we're brought back into setup mode and we start to add some rotation, you'll notice that the geometry is not going to move at all. But that's the beauty of setup mode. If I were to go ahead and change the orientation of the head bone and exit setup mode, now this is our new position, our new starting point. Now in this case, that's not going to work out too well. It's kind of awkward, so I'll go ahead and undo back. And there we have it. Cool, so now it's time to skin the rest of the character. This won't take much time at all. Let's go ahead and do this. We'll grab our root joint. Let's go ahead and now right click, and from there, we'll basically grab the entire hierarchy. So I'm going to go ahead and right click actually from the items viewport so we can choose select item hierarchy. Now with all of our joints selected, we can go to groups and we can create a new group from our selection. Sweet. From there we can go ahead and use the name skeleton. You could always use that, or let's say bind. Anything that's going to be very clear so that you know exactly what's going to be contained inside of this group. So in my case, I might stick with skeleton so I know that, hey, all of my joint objects can be accessed from this group. Let's make sure our mode is set to from selected items, and we'll now go ahead and choose OK. So if we want to, we can go ahead and right click and we can choose members visible off when we're ready to animate. But right now that's not going to do us any good. Let's go ahead and switch this back to default. And now we'll go ahead and right click and we'll choose select items. Sweet, so with all of our joints selected, we can now go in and shift select the character's body. Now, once brought back to setup mode, we can go to bind and we can choose heat as our bind type. This is a super reliable way of skinning. It does require that our joints are inside of the mesh, or inside of the volume of our mesh, that is. And we need to make sure our mesh is super clean. It does not like non-manifold surfaces. But despite that, I mean, this is a great way to skin. You'll notice that when we choose OK, take a look at our weight distribution. I think that this is the best option that we have here for a character. Super cool, and we can always test this theory. Let's go ahead and turn off setup mode. We'll go ahead and grab, let's say, a joint, and we'll start to add some rotation, and there you have it. So you can see that the result is great. But that's it for this lesson. In the following lesson, let's go ahead and in this lesson, for one, what if you wanted to go in and add extra joints? Let's say if you needed to hold volume a bit better in the torso or in any other area on the model. How would you go about doing that? Well, what we can do is simply bind the same way we normally would. And here's why. If we were to go to our Deformers tab, you'll notice that we have a bunch of normalizing folders, and this is what holds all of our weighting information. So we can basically go in and create an extra joint just fine, because all Modo is going to do is create another normalizing folder just so we can update our weights. So to kind of show you how this works, what I'll do is grab the skeleton tool. Let's go back to setup. We'll grab the skeleton tool. We'll go ahead and head over to our side view, hitting the 3 key. And let's go ahead and create a bone object. Remember, we can't just create one joint because we cannot skin to one joint. It has to be a joint and a child joint, or a bone. I'm now go ahead and drop the tool with a space bar. Let's go ahead and take this joint, jump back to the perspective view with the period key, again on the number pad. And we'll just go ahead and move this forward and over to the side. Alright, so we've added an extra bone object. Now how would we add it to the skin? Let's go ahead and shift select the character's geometry. Let's enter into setup mode. Let's go back to our Deformers tab, and we'll now choose bind. And there you have it. Now you can see how much influence this one joint is going to have. So at that point, what you'd want to do is work with a really neat tool called Isolate Weights. So with this tool, we're able to choose the vertices that should be influenced by a given joint. And then once we run it, it's going to remove weighting everywhere else. For example, if I were to go in and let's say select the character's geometry, head over to vertex mode and select a set of points, I'll go ahead and use the middle mouse button to create a lasso selection. That way we can grab visible and invisible elements. And now watch this. Once we've done that, we can basically jump back to items mode. Just we can choose the bone object that we would like to weight. And now when we go back to vertex mode, after selecting these things, take a look at what happens when we use Isolate Weights. Now all of that weighting has been removed and it's just focused on the points we have selected. This is going to work out to be very helpful for us when we weight a few areas on our model. But I just wanted to show you how that works. I'll just go ahead and undo back to remove the bone object to make sure it no longer influences our weights. Let's go ahead and just delete that. Sweet. Another thing to check for is to make sure that all geometry has been skinned. For example, we have the ponytail at the back. Now, after this course, if you'd like, you can go ahead and rig this. You can create a control system for it. You'll know exactly how to do that. But for the sake of time, I'll just go ahead and have these two objects, the ponytail and the scrunchie, skinned to the character's head bone. So with them selected, we'll go ahead and shift select the head bone. We'll head over to setup mode, and we'll now bind. Let's go to our Deformers tab. Remember, we couldn't use heat here because the joint itself is not inside of the volume of our mesh, but we can work with the default settings. Smooth distance is going to work out very well. Alright, fantastic. Now, let's go ahead and do this. We'll select just the head bone. We'll exit setup mode. And we'll start to add some rotation. Let's go ahead and grab our local coordinate system. And as you can see, we're getting a lot of volume loss in the character's head. No worries, we can fix this easily. Let's go ahead and undo back to reset the joint. Another way you can do that, if you were to go ahead and start adding some rotation, is to head over to your properties viewport, and from there you'd go to reset and choose either rotation, or you can also choose all, and that'll set it back. But now, with our head bone selected, again I'm going to go ahead and just drop the tool, shift select the mesh, and then jump to vertex mode. Now, again, we can use the middle mouse button to do a lasso selection to grab the points that we would like to reweight. I'll then go ahead and hold down Control and use the middle mouse button to deselect points that we would not like to influence just yet. So just blocking in our weighting at this point. I find that that is the best approach because it allows you to get a good idea of the volume you'd like to keep, and then you could start to refine afterwards, or you could start to blend your weights. Alright, so with all of these selected, we can now head over to our weighting tab. We'll then go to adjust weights and take a look at what happens. Modo is going to show us all of the weighting that the current bone has over all of our selected points. Now, it not only shows us that, but it allows us to interactively change our weighting with the left mouse button. So as we start to drag to our left, you can see we're starting to remove weight. And you can see how we're starting to lose that red coloring, letting us know that our weighting is getting closer and closer to 0. So we'd have to drag to our right to set all of these to 100%. And now watch this, in no time at all, if we were to go ahead and add some rotation to our head bone, I'll go ahead and drop the tool, go back to items mode, and make sure that just that's selected. You'll now notice that when we, again, add rotation, we're getting much better volume, right? How cool is that? That didn't take much time at all. So I really enjoy using the adjust weights tool along with the isolate weights tool to get the look that I'd like to have as the character deforms. You'll notice that we're getting a bit of volume loss in the character's neck where that connects into the head. So we can go ahead and tweak that as well. Let me go ahead and show you this. If we were to go ahead and reset our head bone using our reset tool, we can add some animation. Let's go to our animation settings at the bottom right of Modo. We'll go ahead and set our end time to 20 and our playback end time to the same, so we have some frames to play with. And now let's do this on frame 0, making sure we have our rotate tool active so we can highlight our rotate channels. We can press the S key. Yep, you're animating in this course. Didn't know that, huh? Sweet. And we do have introduction to animation if you'd like to learn more about that. But now's not the time and place. Not necessarily, right? We will be setting keyframes. You get the idea. Alright, cool. So we'll head over to frame 10. Let's go to make sure auto key is set to animated. That way it will update all of our animated channels when we go in and add a head turn. So now we can go ahead and keep track of our progress, right? So what we'll do is go ahead and grab the character's geometry, and then from there we'll go to edge mode. Once we've done that, we'll go ahead and double click to grab an edge loop. You can see there are a few other edges to select, so we can loop around the part of the neck that we'd like to reweight. And now it's just a matter of converting this to vertices. How would we do that? Well, take a look. If you were to go back to vertex mode at the top, you'll notice that we have access to our hotkeys, right? And Alt-1 is going to convert us to a vertex selection. So let's go ahead and use that. Alt-1, and there you have it. So once we've managed to do that, we can then go in, head over to items mode, grab the head bone, jump back to vertex mode. You'll notice that our vertices are selected. So watch this. Let's go ahead and start to scrub to take a look at what we need to fix. And now it's just a matter of using the adjust weights tool. Let's go ahead and start to kind of add a little bit more influence to those points by dragging over to our right with the left mouse button. And there you have it. Now that feels more organic, right? How cool. So that's a look at the skinning tools here in Modo, and we just explored just a few of these, but they're very effective tools. Again, these are tools that I enjoy using to take care of my weighting, simply because, I mean, they are very reliable and pretty straightforward as well. So that's going to end this lesson. In the following lesson, we'll get right in and